Hi, everybody. Um, just wanted to start this off by saying thank you so much for joining. I, for the past 3 months, have been reassigned for the Forest Service for the Pacific Northwest region to work on fire communications and the emergency response team that was stood up by the Forest Service Regional Office in response to COVID-19. So part of that has been looking at the readiness of the public affairs and public information communities of practice across the region. And part of this was really thinking of what are we not thinking of? What are we not aware of? What's out there that we just haven't thought of because we're so focused on, all of the incomings, all of the emails, all of the things that were so unknown back in March and April and May, and there's still a lot of those out there. So two things really came to the fore, and that was we need to know more than just the Forest Service, but really thinking inclusively about our entire community of practice of where are folks actually at. And once we know that, then we can work backward from there and reverse engineer some of the just-in-time trainings, which this is a part of, that folks actually might need. So there were a series of learnings, and Kale probably has that report already loaded in, but there were really 4 key findings as a result of that survey that over 80 folks from all different agencies, casual folks, ADs, you name it, lots of folks took it, that really led us to 4 key things. And that was that collectively, we are carrying a high to very high stress level. About a month and a half ahead of when we would normally, I guess, be carrying that kind of stress level around. So as a group, we're pretty stressed out right now. When we asked folks why, a lot of that had to do with uncertainty, confusion about, am I ready logistically or technologically to be able to do this virtually? Do I understand where the lines are and where messaging has changed, and just so many unknowns out there in a lot of different ways. And then also an overall watch out on overall PAO, PIO availability. So those were the 4 key learnings. And out of that, we didn't want it to just be a learning, because what's learning and assessment or a pulse check if you don't take action on it? So based on that, we were able to glean what folks needed. So we really decided that based on those learnings, that we should offer some classes and some just-in-time trainings to help move folks. Maybe if you reported a comfort level of a 2, maybe help you get to a 3, or if you're at a 3 to a 4, or maybe just help with that self-realization that, maybe this just isn't the year for me, and it's okay not to be okay. So really thinking about how we can best live out some of our values around safety, not only the physical, but also the social and the psychological. Recognizing that we're re-wrestling with a lot of stuff in our personal lives. Several folks have been for months and months now. And then also, what does it look like to be in service to each other? That's another Forest Service key core value. And that's not only to each other, it's also to the American people. So as we look at stewarding the whole, it's not only meeting each of us where we're at, having grace and compassion in the system, providing that training to help decrease stress and increase comfort and readiness for the season, but then also looking at how do our learnings and how can our training be impactful and value added to our agency administrators, our incident commanders, and our line officers who we're going to be working with and supporting, in addition to each other and those communities we serve. So with that, I'll stop, but that's the big why, and a little bit of context about how we got here, why this matters, and why the amazing cadre that's going to present these series of trainings was put together. Thanks.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you for that introduction. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining the first class in a series of just-in-time trainings developed for the public affairs and public information community in the Northwest. My name is Chris Barth. I'm a member of the cadre that has been working on, for the last week to develop this training series. I'm one of the lead PIOs on PNW2 incident management team. I also am the fire mitigation specialist and a member of the fire communications team for BLM Montana Dakota's fire and aviation management. Joining me today is Sarah Sarlos. Sarah is a lead PIO in PNW2 IMT as well. And finally, we have P.A.C.E, also with PNW2, who will be helping to facilitate the recording of the class and monitoring the chat box for us today. As we go through today's class, our intention is to provide a foundation and a common operating picture. We will be building on the topics from today's class in the subsequent classes. As we saw in the recent survey responses, there was a wide variety of comfort level with all of the material that has come out over the last few months. Again, as Holly just introduced that to us. This class will be more of a lecture style than the following classes, but again, that is to help us get on the same page. You will find that we will be introducing more skills-based content and interaction in the future classes. So why are we doing this? Again, Holly introduced some of this, but I'm just going to reiterate that the Federal Fire and Communications leadership in the Northwest identified this need to explore these unknowns and assess our readiness. How are we going to be able to respond to wildfire during a pandemic? It was also identified as a need in the Northwest Incident Management Team best practices as a recommendation to have this survey and to assess where people are at and to develop this training quickly to prepare individuals with their reported needs. So again, that just-in-time training, recognizing the demands on the staff and quickly train additional PIOs. Region 6 announced this just-in-time training occurring throughout the season, which is what we're introducing today and will be taking place over the next several weeks. The design of these trainings began in early June with the goal of completing the series of 3 modules before fire activity picks up in the Northwest in July. The series of training includes 3 modules with a total of 6 classes. Participation in class 102, 103, 201, and 202 are prerequisites for class 301, which will be a simulation designed to run through the various scenarios. Class 203 is expected to be delivered at a later date. Each class will be recorded and be made available following the completion of the series. Handouts, including the class PowerPoint, will also be available. In each class, we will try to represent the public affairs and public information dichotomy. The modules are designed to build upon each other, and as a result, you might hear some things in one class and find that we expand on that in future classes. The class structure is designed to work through how to prepare for fire year 2020 from pre-incident planning to functioning on an incident. And again, it culminates in a simulation that will cover various scenarios. In this class, supply and demand, we're focusing on getting ready for your first deployment in this new environment. We're going to present some examples of what a public information shop and the support roles might look like with a mix of on-site, remote, and virtual public information officers. And finally, we're going to help identify important themes to discuss with the host unit and how those may affect public information tasks. This class and subsequent classes will follow a similar format. Other than class 301, the simulation, each class will be about 2 hours long. After each section of the class, there will be an opportunity to ask questions about the material. We'll take a brief break after each section. At the end of the class, we'll summarize the content, share resources, and introduce the next class. Before we begin, I want to cover a few requests from the cadre. We ask that you keep your camera off and mute your microphone during the class. If your connection drops during the class, as I shared earlier, this will be recorded for viewing later. Please use the chat box if you have a question. The instructors will answer questions at the end of each section to the best of their ability. The chat will also remain available in this Teams following the class for anyone that may want to refer back to the discussion, the responses, or the links that were shared. Again, as a reminder, this is our opportunity to take a deep breath and remember that we're all in this together. We all have different experiences, have experienced the last few months differently, and it's okay that we are approaching this from different comfort levels. So take a deep breath as we go through the foundations of all the reading and research, suggestions for conversations we can have now to plan for success, and getting ready to take your first assignment and implement the skills that you have been developing. So getting ready. Hopefully everyone knows where to find both the Wildland Fire Response Plan, or WFRP, for the Northwest Geographic Area, and the Northwest Incident Management Team's recommended best practices document. Links to the documents are available in the presentation, as well in the resources folder for this class. The WFRPs were developed for each geographic area in March through May. These were developed by the area command teams in conjunction with representatives from each geographic area. These were intended to provide a broad overview of considerations for wildland fire response during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Northwest IMT best management practices were completed near the end of May and provide much more specific recommendations for wildland fire response in the Northwest. These were also developed by a diverse group of interagency partners. If you have not read through them, you should do so now. Another important step in getting ready is to spend some time in the FireNet 365 environment. You can build your resources in FireNet 365 now, so you have them ready to use on your first incident. We'll be talking more about those resources later in this class and in subsequent classes. Also, we'll drop a link to authoritative information in the chat box for people that still have questions about FireNet 365. And we continue to hear examples of people having issues with this on incidents. Just this morning, we heard from the PIOs on the Bighorn fire that people still struggle with FireNet, and they spend a lot of time getting people set up, which is taking time away from getting information, critical information, out to the public about their fire. I know that most, if not all of you, have been receiving hundreds of emails. Again, Holly introduced this early on, but we've been receiving hundreds of emails and information, the newest versions of guidance and memos, etc. Because of this, I think there's a lot of us that have become numb to the deluge of information and may not be sure what you really need to pay attention to. Based on the feedback from incidents that have been occurring, these foundational pieces are proving to be invaluable. The public information content in the Wildland Fire Response Plan for the Northwest Geographic Area can be found in Section 6.2, Public Information, and in Appendix 4BE, Fire Information. So we've created a crosswalk of Section 6.2 and Appendix 4BE for each of the geographic area wildland fire response plans. That's going to be made available to you. And again, it's in the team's folder under resources for this class. Most of the information is consistent across the geographic areas, with a few exceptions for some localized considerations. The Northwest Incident Management Team recommended best practices has references for the public information function throughout the document, but the majority of the detail and recommended best practices can be found in Appendix E. So we've actually worked on a document, and I'll talk a little bit more about it for you to use, that Appendix E for your use. But we're also working on a crosswalk document for each of the geographic area best management practices, that tiered down step. But that's a little bit more challenging because the format for each of those best management practices, that document format varies widely across the geographic areas. We will, however, as I said just a minute ago, we're going to have this customizable Appendix E from the Northwest Incident Management Team Best Management Practices Guide, and that will be in the resources. It's in there now, actually, so you can make it work for your team or your public affairs shop. So let's talk about some things for the PIO to do to get ready. If you've not done so, check to make sure your accounts and passwords are current. I know this seems like another obvious thing to complete, but as you're preparing for the fire season, but I'll give you an example. I was recently contacted by a PIO1 and a PIO2 that were working on a growing Type 3 fire, was getting ready to transition to a Type 2 incident management team. And again, because we've all been busy and we probably think that we'll just figure it out when it's our turn, or that everything might change before it's our turn, these individuals hadn't logged into the FireNet 365 or updated their NCWeb accounts. And I'd venture to guess that they might not have had time to review the Geographic, WFRP, or the BMPs either. So use those WFRPs, Wildland Fire Response Plans, and best management practices to begin asking yourself, and those you're working with this year, what can you do now to be prepared? I know a lot of you are doing some of this already, but because there's still a lot of unknowns as well as rapid lessons learned that are shaping our understanding, it can seem overwhelming. And again, I can speak from my own experience here, having been involved in the planning efforts at some level for the last 3 months. I still find myself recognizing more that I could be doing now to make the first fire assignment go smoothly. Many of the IMTs are developing their own plans based on the foundation of the Wildland Fire Response Plan and the best management practices. If you've not already been doing this, work with your team to develop your team's plan to be successful for this fire year. If you are not on an IMT, reach out to those you are likely to work with to have conversations about your comfort level with responding on-site, remote, or virtually, and your ability to function independently. Many of us use the PIO Incident Organizer as a reference. Take a look at it and see what else you may need this year to be successful. Some additional things to consider. Again, the Northwest Wildland Fire Response Plan recommends that you should be prepared to be self-sufficient for several days. The latest National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group, or NMAC memo, says that all resources should have at least 3 days of PPE, things like masks, hand sanitizer, etc., which also needs to cover us during our travel and mobilization. The Northwest Wildland Fire Response Plan also recommends PIOs should ensure that they have technology to support virtual assignments. So whether working on-site, remote, or virtual, look through your kit to see if you have things like MiFi, mics, etc. to support the role that you're going to fill, or the resources that you have responding to your fire. For the public affairs officer, review your fire communication strategy. Most agencies have information at the ready for incoming public information resources. Take a look at it now, if you've not already done so, to make sure it has been updated to reflect the recommended best practices. The Northwest WFRP suggests that the host units should evaluate and update contact lists and electronic trap lines in advance to provide those to team PIOs within the in-briefing packages. So do you have emails for locations that are typically on your physical trap line route? Do your email lists include new partners like local public health departments and local emergency operation centers that have been in operation for months already? The Northwest Best Management Practices also recommends a mechanism to support public information for multiple incidents. Is there a JIC plan that's been established for where you work? Have you been working with the local EOC and their JIC? Again, these places have been operating for months. Do they have capacity to help support multiple incidents in your area? There's a concern that the number of PIOs available, like many other resources, will be less this year than in years past. A joint information center could help distribute some of the common public information workload so that all incidents can be successful in keeping the affected communities informed with clear, timely, and accurate information. Some resources for the public affairs officer include the fire staff within your organization. Many of them have been coordinating with cooperators and local health partners for several months. I'm sure many of the PAOs in this class are talking with these cooperating agencies' public affairs counterparts, but if you've not yet done so, again, do so now. As mentioned previously, there's a distinct possibility that there will be fewer public information resources this fire year. Who else can assist with public information support to fires? This may be someone who does not have an NWCG PIO qualification, but has skills that are applicable to the need. A few hours of work from additional support staff can greatly improve the success and battle rhythm for public information. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah for questions.
Thanks so much for joining the class, you guys. I'm jumping through some hoops to get here. We've covered a lot of the reading and research portion. And so now we've got about 10 minutes to go over some questions.
Hey, a quick question. In working remote and trying to go ahead and maybe do some sorts of trap lines with flyers, not necessarily like we used to in the past, have you been giving any thought to the idea of how we would deal with being able to print numbers of those sorts of things? I know I have a printer, a small transportable one, but it would take me hours to crank out even 20 or 30 of those flyers.
This is the year of us being as self-sufficient with our PIO tools that we bring, and then also just for our own self-care and our own being able to basically take care of ourselves this year. This year it's going to be so different with logistics. Kale, do you see any more out there?
you know what, Sarah, we do have some participants jumping in the chat to let us know that they can see it. Again, this is one of these, the reasons why we're using, I'll turn my camera on real quick, folks. The reason why we're using Teams on these trainings is because the lessons learned right now out there in the world of teams in Arizona on assignment, everybody's got to get in on this and figure out how to make Teams work for us. And learning through this process of the chat room being locked out to USDA folks, there is an incentive there then to get your FireNet account, even if this is your full career and you've always just done what you've done. This is the year to make sure you can bridge into when a team comes to your forest and they invite you into these planning meetings, cooperator meetings, strategic meetings. We got to break through these barriers. Folks are talking about the trap line quite a bit. Ludi Bond has a suggestion that local PAOs could ask the folks on their virtual trap lines if they would make the copies for the folks who visit their locations. I have heard Chad also potential S numbers to help some businesses that do an extraordinary amount of printing. Back to you, Sarah. Just another lesson learned from Ludi that, you know, setting things up ahead of time. So the Florida fire seasons earlier this year, they were out a couple times in April, May. And so the advice from those folks is this is the time for public affairs officers and people with influence to set this up, the virtual trap line context and things. PL levels can go from 1 to high fast, as Michelle Fiddler and her teams down there are finding out.
Yeah, this definitely is a season to get all the ducks and even more ducks in a row. So
we're now going to be talking about what a public information shop might look like with a mix of on-site, remote, and virtual public information officers. There was a significant number of respondents that were interested in this topic, nearly 78% of those that took the survey. Along those lines, some of the comments were related to how a mix of on-site, remote, and virtual PIOs will work in reality. PIOs that are not trained to work virtually or may not understand what a virtual organization structure is like, and also thinking about how to manage the stuff we can't actually see or observe. It is important to remember that while we may have been forced into thinking differently about what a PIO shop looks like in 2020, we have experience in working remotely and virtually in the past. We've done some of this, and there's value in these concepts moving into the future as well. So before we go too far into this topic, I want to take a beat just to talk about what we mean when we say on-site, remote, and virtual. And again, I know a lot of folks have been using these terms and I think pretty accurately, but on-site personnel, those are the people that are assigned to work at the ICP or any other camp where they interact in person. So those are the people, again, at the ICP, they're working, they're at the CNG meeting, they're wearing their masks, they're doing their physical distancing. Remote personnel, those are assigned to the incident, but physically separated from all the on-site personnel. Remote personnel are located within a close proximity to the ICP, but not sharing facilities. And I think this gets to Wayne's question too, about how to get stuff. You know, the remote personnel, the physical interaction between the remote and the on-site should be limited, but it can happen as long as there's some approved physical distance standards followed. So there might be somebody that brings out a bunch of copies if the copy machine is located at the ICP and a remote person is out doing a trap line, again, if that's how it's being set up on your incident. So there is a way to manage that. And finally, the virtual personnel. Those are people that are working from any location outside of commuting distance. Those individuals must be dedicated to the performance of the incident duties, but can work from a virtual location. There's not going to be face-to-face interaction with these people unless we're talking about these virtual video conferencing. So Pacific Northwest 2, PNW 2 IMT approached the question of what a public information shop will look like by using the P.A.C.E, or Primary Alternate Contingency and Emergency Planning model. We took a look at the knowns and worked to fill in the unknowns based on the best available information, including the Northwest WFRP and the Northwest Best Management Practices. We chose to have primary, or the P org chart, be what the shop would look like without any limitations in a, you know, what is a more traditional year. As you can see in the top image, most of the boxes are colored in white, indicating that those would be on-site resources. As a reference, the Northwest WFRP says remote work assignments and virtual workspaces should be used as much as possible. So because of this, we built emergency, or E org chart next, knowing that this was going to most likely be the case at this time. So this is also mostly consistent with the Northwest BMPs that indicate 1 to 2 PIOs on site and 2 to 5 PIOs working virtually or remotely. Each of these, the primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency, serve as a slide deck for us to build out our plan based on the current conditions when we get an incident. We will make, in fact, these org charts are available to you in the resources folder for this class. And for the public affairs officer, it's important to know that the staff will likely be working all over the place. So coordination and a common operating picture will be critical for success. And again, we're going to talk about how to achieve that. So part of our virtual PIO shop planning also included an acknowledgement that there may be fewer PIOs available to respond to fire this year. Again, I talked about that a little bit earlier in the first section. Some of the reasoning could be, there's limitation on travel distance, increase in home unit obligations, or some people just need to limit their exposure for being in a high-risk group. And as Holly mentioned, this might just not be the year for everybody because of so much that's been going on for all of us and how it's affecting us differently. Some possible resolutions to this challenge could include host unit staff helping to cover roles within the PIO shop. Local agency staff, which may or may not be the same, can provide support from employees that are typically connected with the community and familiar with some of the local culture, landmarks, road names, etc. Or we could recruit individuals that may not have that PIO qualification, but they have a willingness and an ability to help. In order to prepare these non-traditional individuals, some training can be offered now to prepare that surge capacity within the PIO shop, such as quick sessions on social media, InstaWeb, or what have you. So how do you handle effective communication within the team with everyone being so spread out? So here's that emergency or E organization chart that I shown earlier, but now blown up a little larger. Again, you can see that most of the resources are either remote or virtual. Now they're colored in orange. So we on PNW2 have chosen to look at the org chart and the PIO daily task list that we use to make sure that all the expectations are being met and understand how the chain of command will work so that resources located offsite will have direct communication with the on-site positions, as well as a common operating picture of what is happening on the incident and within the other branches of the PIO shop. This is consistent, again, with the Northwest WFRP, which says that on-site PIO would coordinate with the other functions and resources, funneling current information to the rest of the staff for dissemination. There's some great rapid lessons learned being shared out of the Southwest of how this has worked and some of the challenges they faced, as well as how they found resolution to those challenges. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some of what Southwest Team 1 and their lessons learned in the next section. As we just shared, a common operating picture is critical to making sure resources understand what is happening at the incident and feel connected to the others they are working with. As an example, when PNW2 was assigned to the state of Washington EOC to assist with their response to COVID-19 pandemic, we had 3 PIOs assigned. 2 were on-site and 1 was virtual. We found that it was extremely valuable to use all the available technology to check in with each other, physically seeing each other to understand body language and intention. We also used regularly scheduled times to check in with each other. So we had a set time that we would do those check-ins. When it was not possible for a number of reasons, it was easy for the virtual PIO, which was me, to miss out on something that was occurring on site, and the onus on those folks that were on site to make sure it got conveyed. And as a CNG, we mitigated this by deciding it was important to do a round robin with each section at the beginning of CNG meetings to cover important things that had occurred via face-to-face conversations on site. Again, there are some great examples of how to make sure everyone has a common operating picture from folks like Southwest Team 1 in the PIO toolbox. I think as we all use and become familiar with FireNet 365 and Teams, like we talked about during the intermission, we will continue to find ways to stay connected while being apart. As I just alluded to, Southwest Team 1 developed some rapid lessons learned from their assignment on the Sawtooth fire. One of those was managing the chain of command in a virtual environment. And the resolution for them was to clarify that chain of command and the individual roles. So having a defined org chart, like the one we shared just previously, is a first step to addressing that challenge. Another challenge was bridging the virtual world and those at the ICP. And their resolution was to use Teams chat and keeping that open during the day, which served as a group kind of as a group text or a collaborative workspace. You can also create channels within the team space for each of the branches to help organize the conversations and the products. So what is different in the remote and virtual world? So think about what would happen if there was a change on the fire, such as, I don't know, a blow up in Division Alpha. Typically, we update the whiteboard in the shop, maybe send a group text. In the remote and virtual world, this needs to happen in a collaborative space so that everyone has the correct information, perhaps even in the form of an approved talking point, so that people in the virtual land understand the context and the relevance to the overall incident. And now, again, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah for some questions.
Okay. So I know this is a lot of information that's coming in, but the nice thing is that we are recording this session. So it feels like you're drinking out of a fire hose. It is recorded. And then also the PowerPoint will be provided as well. So if you want to like click through and kind of read through the slides. So we just covered kind of, you know, what the information shop can look like and gave some ideas. So we've got about 10 minutes again to focus on questions that we just covered in the PowerPoint. And I know that there was a couple raised hands. And Cale, can you let me know which whose hands we've got raised?
Sure, yeah, let's circle back to Joe Anderson. Joe, we cut you off during the intermission there.
One of the questions I had was dealing with the language interpretation and how that's going to be working, and just wanted to bring that up from the outside.
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe. And actually, I know it was just kind of a little small screen there when it showed the PNW2 org chart, but we actually have and Chris, what did we call the branch? We made up some.
That's the EDI branch.
Yeah, which stands for
Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion.
So it's definitely important to us. And there's we have a session coming up, Joe, called Closing the Gap, and that's exactly what it is. So that's part of that session is even if we didn't have the COVID situation happening, closing the gap on making sure that we address the EDI concerns and just different methods of communication.
Great, I'm glad you were able to incorporate that and you thought about it. Perfect, thank you.
Thanks for the question. Okay, Cale, who do we have next?
Mr. Howard Hunter, if you still have your question, we'll go to you. And if not, we'll go to John Miller. So Howard first, then John.
Yeah, hey, Cale. Hey, we're specifically in the NWCC site are those wildfire response plans for the Northwest.
Okay, so Howard, when I'll make sure you get them offline too, but in the meeting chat notes, if you're able to see those, I've been dropping them here. They're also within what we call the Schoolhouse Reference Library. Everything in the world is there for you. I'll circle back with you afterwards to make sure you and others are getting access to all those resources.
I've also, sorry, Cale, I've also located the things I've been referencing, including both of those documents in the resources for this class.
Yeah, at the very end of this, there'll be a slide that just has links to all the documentation. But I really appreciate you bringing that up because, you know, Howard, I know that there's probably other people that either can't be in the chat or they haven't taken the step to accept the invite or whatever. So this is our first one. So it's great to be able to have that feedback because we want to make sure that we're not saying, hey, there's all these great tools, but they're hidden in a secret box someplace. So thanks for that question. And who else do we have, Cale?
Yeah, let's go with John Miller. If you could pop your camera on and unmute, or I'll ask your question for you.
Yeah, you know, we had this discussion today amongst our team because we're on 2 hour, and you know, we've come up with our own internal concept of operations and how we're going to put our various mitigations in place. But one of the things that we are wondering about is whether through the letter of delegation or some other instrument that the local units, whether it's BLM or forest, are going to mandate the PIO shop to take certain mitigations, or just recommend it and allow us to use our best practices, our best judgment to mitigate the risk.
Well, thanks so much for that question, John. And you're actually, it's a great segue, because this last final section, we are going to cover the DOA. So that's, thanks for the setup. We appreciate that. And yeah, it's something that we're looking at ways that you can have those conversations during the in-briefing, and just being able to know what's expected and what you can offer. And then again, with that COVID layer kind of blended in. So thanks so much for that question. And if we don't answer the question in this next section, let's readdress it, because I want to make sure that you get what you need, especially with being, sounds like you guys are up to bat. So should we take one more, Kale, or where are we at?
I don't see a hand up, but I did want to let folks know Josie Williams made a note here in the chat that she logged out 3 times before it allowed me to get in under FireNet, and now she sees the chat room. So quirky here, quirky there. Thanks for that feedback, Josie. Welcome. And again, we'll try to mitigate for tomorrow's class and see if we can get on the back end of Teams and change some settings if they are locked in certain ways. Okay, back to you, sir.
Okay, well, with that, we're going to take another quick 5-minute break. And so we're going to take that break and kind of get ready for our last and final section. And then we will be taking questions at the very end of that just can kind of cover the whole session, and then also with the future classes that we have planned. So we'll see you back in 5 minutes.
Okay, and during the intermission, if somebody wants to chat about FireNet or experiences, I will hang out. I know there's some music that'll be here too.
Hey, Chris.
Chris might not be here. Oh, he might be taking.
No, I'm here. What do you need?
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who was on there? The FireNet. I just thought one of the things to bring up is for all those groups that are going to be working with Air Resource Advisors, they did not switch over from the Google accounts, their FireNets. So just as another thing for people to be aware of is that interaction, making sure that you come up with really nice ways to transfer information. But I know that group for sure is not, they have not transferred to 365.
Okay, so just to understand you correctly, the ARAs are continuing to use Google?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so that's important to know on, like you said, downloading, uploading, sharing, transfer. Okay, thanks. Thank you. Welcome back. Again, appreciate you joining us today. Again, some people might have joined late. We've covered some material that is important to review and consider as we get ready. Obviously, comfort with Teams and FireNet 365, as well as those planning documents that really provide a solid foundation for our understanding of how to respond to fires during the COVID-19 pandemic. We've also discussed what a virtual PIO shop looks like, as well as how to communicate effectively with the team. We're now going to be talking about clear expectations when arriving to the incident. And just as a reminder, again, if you're on, please, I think everybody has their cameras off, but also if you can mute your mics, and we'll get to questions if we need to at the end of this section. So now we're going to be talking about, again, as I said, this clear expectations when arriving to the incident. So how many times, I've got an example of a delegation of authority related to information that I pulled out of an actual incident that I was on. But how many times have we seen a delegation of authority that covers information like the example here? Disseminate information to the media and public. Right? Like, obviously, we should be seeking further clarification with our counterparts, our public affairs officers or the PIO during that functional breakout. This year, that clarification is going to be even more critical. Again, we were talking about that a little bit during the Q&A in the last session. Again, there's another example from this morning's National Public Information Officer call. Stan Floria from NIFC Forest Service emphasized the importance of getting clear direction in the delegation of authority. And then another gentleman, Mark Thibodeau from the Forest Service as well, was also floating the idea of some standard language for the information component of the delegation of authority. Again, specific to how we're going to respond during a COVID environment. So it might be advantageous, and again, I think some of those concepts are leading to this, but it might be advantageous for us to have canned expectations for the delivery of clear, timely, and accurate information before we even have an incident. So that, you know, public affairs officers on the call, that's something to consider. What do you expect folks to do with respect to meetings and trap lines and et cetera? And this can also apply to the IMT PIOs. At one time, I developed a statement for consideration to be included in the delegation based on what I knew my team was capable of. So how many teams have those pre-planned statements of what they would like to see and how they would like to see their function represented in the delegation of authority? So some of the deeper conversations with our counterparts should address the statements in the WFRP, the Wildland Fire Response Plan. Again, these are things we would be doing anyway, but this just puts a finer point on the details specific to COVID-19 considerations and an increase in virtual PIO resources. In addition to the basics, consider the direction on information releases regarding COVID-19 specific issues. All releases should be consistent and follow the delegation of authority the team is working under. And the local public affairs offices maintaining close contact with regional, national, and department office directives, guiding those PIOs on what can and cannot be released. Again, there's rapidly still stuff coming out about this. Again, we heard this morning from Stanton about some clearance on the what we're doing. And then when it's into the why questions, that those are things that would get elevated further up the chain. We know that there are some differences depending on which jurisdiction the fire is on as well. So there could be challenges with multi-jurisdictional fires that have different direction. Again, it's important to have all the players at the table and potentially even documenting those expectations, which I'm going to address in a minute. But again, having those conversations, coming with an expectation, and making sure that we discuss these things and have a really clear common operating picture of what the information function is going to do. Again, just, you know, the Southwest Team 1 was early out and they did a really good job documenting things, but some more lessons from their experience on the Sawtooth fire. And I like the quote from their lessons learned report, and the complete quote by Steve Maraboli says, "It's a lack of clarity that creates chaos and frustration. Those emotions are poison to any living goal." So one of the challenges that they had on Sawtooth was the ask. This is related to a desire to hold a virtual meeting quickly. The resolution was to seek clarification about the why. What was the true desire, and could it be met or perhaps better met through other means? Another challenge was related to some of the points on the previous slide. What capacity do PIOs have to speak about COVID-19 issues? And again, there's conversations that are happening right now about that. But in order to be responsive to the community, a number of basic talking points were approved for dissemination, while that further clarification and approval was received on how to handle COVID-19 related inquiries. As I mentioned just a bit ago, it could be helpful to both the IMT and the host unit to further document the expectations for the incident information. One example is an incident information agreement. If nothing else, this can serve as a reminder of the things that are important to cover in a functional breakout. And again, this resource is available in this class's resources folder. As a reminder, in-briefing and functional breakouts have often been occurring virtually. So having a document in Teams or some other virtual platform for all parties to look at is invaluable. If used as a formal agreement, make sure to have both the agency administrator and the incident commander aware of those decisions. So as we close out this section, I want to look at a few of the additional statements from the Northwest WFRP. And Virginia, if somebody's got their mic open, if you could mute your mic to take your call offline. Thank you, Kale, for muting all, and I just had to turn my mic back on. As I was saying, again, as we're looking at a few of the statements from the WFRP to generate some thoughts and evaluation of how prepared you are for this fire year. So communities should be identified and briefed in advance of the fire season to manage expectations and explore alternatives. So what are those current expectations? What has been occurring in the last few months to prepare the community? Have there been prevention messages preparing them that fire response or specifically the information delivery may be different? Use email lists as much as possible to distribute those daily updates. Again, this gets back to some of the questions earlier about somebody working remotely to hand out trap lines and some really great examples that we learned about this morning. But reach out to those traditional trap line locations to get them on the email distribution lists. Have your email list been updated to include the new partners that have been a part of the pandemic response? Have you included emails for locations that, again, fall on that typical physical trap line? What about the local health department and the emergency operations center? Again, from the Brigham fire in Arizona, we learned this morning, they talked about how immensely valuable it was to have the virtual trap line conversion work done pre-season to help set them up for success on that fire. Counterpoint, another fire talked about they did that work as they were beginning to take over that fire and beginning to develop their virtual trap line. So imagine the difference of being able to send information out as soon as you produce it, as opposed to a couple days to really figure out what the right contacts are for those people that you would traditionally have gone and done a face-to-face trap line with. Coordinating COVID-19 messaging with the host unit, public affairs, and or the county local public health departments. So do you have a contact for who those people are? What coordination has occurred with them during the pandemic response that's useful for our fire response? Again, I know these places have been in operation for months. They have quite a bit of experience and knowledge that we can learn from. Plus, they have some great networks, including some of that EDI or that equity, diversity, and inclusion stuff that was talked about in one of those questions earlier. So as an example, in BLM Montana Dakotas and our fire and aviation, I have a list of all the public health offices within the state of Montana to share with incoming resources if that's something that we need to have. All right, so let's just take a quick breath. Today, we've been referenced a few of the resources. We've referenced a few of these resources that are we're sharing with you. They're available in the Teams folder for this class. Again, in a folder called Resources under Module 1, Class 102. And some of them are linked in this presentation. We'll have a copy of the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation, available following the meeting. The materials, as Sarah talked about, we do have the Wildland Fire Response Plan crosswalk. That work that we did on PW2 to just look at all those geographic area plans, specifically to information and how they were similar and different. The Wildland Fire Response Plan is also in there, as well as links in the presentation. The PNW2 Public Information P.A.C.E planning model organization charts are in there as well. Kale's put in a customizable Appendix E of the best management practices from the Northwest IMT Best Management Practices document. And as I mentioned, the best management practice crosswalk is still in development because, again, the comparative tool is going to be a little bit challenging because of the widely varying formats that all of those documents took, but we'll endeavor to work on that. Just so if people are traveling in other parts of the country, it might be useful to understand some of those finer expectations at the tiered down geographic area best management practices level. And also, there are a number of resources with more continuing to be added in the FireNet 365 PIO toolbox teams. And I'm sure a lot of you are members of that, and there might be some questions here at that, but we'll move on. We'll talk about that in our closeout. So next steps, where are we going from here? As I mentioned at the beginning of the class, this class was more of a lecture style than the subsequent classes. So I appreciate everybody's patience for sitting through, again, a number of slides, and we will be working on some more skills-based and interaction in future classes. However, now that we have a common operating picture to build on, you'll find, again, we're going to be using that information for those future classes and more interaction in the subsequent weeks. But before we move on to the next class, you all have homework for tonight. So log into FireNet 365, do the migration if you haven't already. If you don't have a profile, make sure you get one. As Kale talked about, we're going to be working in this environment, and the more experience we have with it ahead of time, the better off we'll be. Log into IntiWeb and check your profile and your access. Again, as I use that example, I had some friends that were going out to a fire and they just hadn't had the time to do it. It kept them from being able to get rolling right away. And so make sure you've had a chance to get into IntiWeb. And then I want to reflect back on what Holly said at the beginning. So think about where you're at with the current environment, the pandemic, information overload, fatigue. A lot of people have been doing, been operating at an incident pace almost for months. Determine how you can best balance your work-life dichotomy. And remember, it's okay to not be okay. And these have been challenging times for people in different ways. Sarah, Kale, and my contact information is located in this slide if you have future questions. And also, we can use the 2020 ORN, WC, PAO, PIO, BMP team, the team that this was all set up in, to continue to chat with the cadre or others in the class. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah to talk about future classes and answer some more questions.
Okay. So, I always just kind of think with this whole FireNet piece, you play like you practice, right? We've all heard that before. And this has been good practice for us. So thanks for joining and being part of this process. I want to remind everyone that we have another class tomorrow, and it's called Modern Media and VOST. And that's going to be at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Kale Casey is going to be the lead on that. And that's going to cover a lot of kind of those nuts and bolts of doing things virtually, and he can expound on that when we kind of wrap up here. But if you can make it, great. If not, again, it'll be recorded as well. So with that, I know that there's questions out there. I see that there's some hands up. So Kale, did you see whose hand went up first?
Sure. Well, let's circle back to Joe Anderson. And we do have a little bit of time for folks, especially folks who couldn't get in the chat. So we'll start with Joe, and we'll go ahead and go from there.
My question was answered. Thank you very much.
Okay, copy that. So especially for folks who didn't get to see the chat, public affairs officers, PIOs, team, state agency, whoever you are out there, this is your chance to jump in with a question, clarification. Again, the goal is to leave you with templates, usable templates. So what you saw on the screen there, you'll get the PowerPoint, you'll get the PNW2 PACE modeling for that unit, which is a neat template that you can just put your team logo on and go. You'll get all the links in there to work with. It's really a chance for you to get tooled up. And then this chat stays live for those who can come back to the team, because we invited really everybody. We really tried to be as inclusive as possible. And all you are considered presenters, to put a period on that sentence. You are all presenters because we tried to make you included in this. So I'm not sure what else to do except for figure out the back end, but let's open it up. Any questions out there? Or is Nick on that we can hear from Washington DNR? I know Garrett's on from the Oregon State Fire Marshals. Garrett?
Just happy to be here.
Hey, how's I know been working with Rich and Damon on your prep, seeing all your plans. How are things for the Marshals looking as you step closer to the season and move from the protests into structure protection?
Yeah, it's probably going to be challenging. We're actually having a team meeting tomorrow, an all-team meeting, that we're going to be discussing more on, when we go out. Our biggest thing is just being able to be prepared both for food and not account for anything being ready, but also having our own COVID-19 supplies, with us and not expecting it to have that available. So that's two of the big things that at least we're working on.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to integrating with you when we go to Unified Command again. And we'll open the floor up for other folks. I see a hand up from Jim.
Yeah, I'll just raise a question that we talked about a little bit yesterday. If you are a local or regional group and you're putting together a joint information center this year, should you plan on building in enough space for remote PIOs to work there on their incidents?
Do we have a subject matter expert who wants to jump in on the JIC piece here? I know we have Don Ferguson on.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Cale, and hi, Jim. We are in Virginia, and I and Christina Beslin from the BLM and a couple of county managers, emergency managers, are talking about that stuff once or twice a week. Our anticipation is that we would maintain a pretty good sized workspace there with room for a bunch of operators. I don't think we're planning on anything fully virtual. I mean, we are going to serve as a remote hub for those fires. And yes, Jim, that's a good consideration to build extra space.
Okay, so what I hear is that there'll be remote, but like within the forest, and then Virginia, are you planning on doing any like virtual people, like say someone from Ohio helping out with social media?
Yes to the first part, Sarah, and the second part, we haven't gotten that far. I have asked the region for a little bit of support in identifying a virtual PIO, like quick list of resources that we could call, because we're not sure who those people would be. So to reach out to them. So that's something that we have asked for. But having these trainings is part of that too. So that's great.
Right.
Good on you. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. And thanks for that feedback. I think that would have a lot of value to a lot of public affairs folks in the Northwest, and then also just for building the bench in teams. I wanted to circle back to John that had the question about the delegation of authority. John, if you're still on, did that answer your question?
Hey, I am. Good afternoon. So my question is about tomorrow's session, and I'm just curious how far in the weeds we're going to get in terms of, for example, I know on the Portland Nemo call earlier, so Zoom sessions, live streaming those via Facebook and YouTube. Just curious what to prepare for tomorrow, and just curious how in depth we're going. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Matthew. Really appreciate that. I was on that call as well. And of course, I'm writing the curriculum, and I want it to be very relevant to what we're doing. My goal is to leave you with some of the key tools that I use for pretty much anything I'm approaching, a few key pieces of equipment that don't cost that much money that I want you to invest in, and that can approach taking a Zoom to live. What they're doing down in Arizona is doing that. They're using Zoom to go live on Facebook. We'll address that. We'll build back into you going live on Facebook, and I'll have a demo account up and running. And I will have some pre-work that I'll send out tonight. And I'll have, after the class, the ability for people to earn a free smartphone holder from me. So the first 5 people who create their own Facebook page, go live on it. Doesn't have to be a personal page, just a dummy page, which is how I test everything before I go live. Create that dummy page after tomorrow's class. Send me a screenshot. I'll send you a free. That'll be in there. So we're going to have some hands-on. We're going to have some looking at what the teams are doing. And definitely the Q&A, because I want for tomorrow, especially for the people who are really into this, I want you to be there asking those questions, because everybody's got a little skill set with them that they've picked up over the years, and there's probably one that's definitely on your mind, and that's what I want, Matthew. So hope that answers that. And Ludi, looks like your hand is up.
Yeah, I just want to kind of chime in a little bit. I think it was Jim that was asking about the virtual JIC and kind of how that would look or work. And so we kind of tested that a little bit on the two assignments, the two fire incidents that the Florida Forest Service had in May. We had the emergency operations PIO and the county fire rescue PIO working with us virtually. And it was wonderful how obviously we created, since we were the lead agency, the lead team, we pushed out our social media posts. They shared them. They helped us with rumor control and identifying rumors and helping to squash those. We worked together on kind of a joint press release and updates throughout the day. And then I think one of the key things that helped us reach local audiences is when we had our live press conferences on Facebook for we had it on our Florida Forest Service Facebook pages, but then they live streamed them as well and promoted it as well when it was going live. So of course the ripple effect was great because they had such a wonderful local following. So it was seamless. They had representation at the incident command post with the fire chief or the emergency operations center director, but we did utilize their PIOs virtually, and it was wonderful, seamless. So just want to kind of throw that in there as to kind of what we did kind of thing.
Great, thanks, Lydia. And I know we always appreciate when your region goes early, gets a lot of answers for us, including it was the first time I heard that an incident management team all got tested before leaving camp and had to stay 24 hours in hotels. You let me in on that before the lesson learned came out. And I really appreciate whenever you share. So please tune in tomorrow if you can. I did have a question from geographic areas of the folks out there. We still have 56 folks on. Do we have anybody from, say, Central Washington in the public affairs who's on?
Yes, Robin DeMario from the Okanagan Wenatchee.
Robin, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Great, thanks. Holly taught me to wait a long time for an answer. Look, it worked. Even old dogs can be trained. So, Robin, how'd the presentation go for you? And I wanted to get your take on things, and I know public affairs officers have been swimming in COVID, so to speak.
Well, I think the presentation went well. I'm looking forward to the subsequent training sessions. We are still working on our electronic trap line, so that's a project that's continuing. It's taking a while, especially as this forest is so large and has so many communities, but we hope to have that in place by the time a team does come to our forest, so we'll keep our fingers crossed on that.
Hey, I appreciate you touching on that, because some of our survey respondents from the public affairs side did say comments such as, you know, I've been so overwhelmed with keeping up with COVID that I haven't really had a chance to X, Y, and Z, whether it's learn new platforms or maybe get some of that other work done. And I know that the PIOs, as you can tell from this conversation today, are leaning on the PIOs. How are you handling that? Is it, I mean, it sounds like you're making progress, but from a PAO standpoint, is it just overwhelming, or?
Well, our plates are full, and it just each day is a little different. But we, as our forest is a fire forest, this is just the normal operating procedure to try and get things in place pre-fire season, so that when teams do arrive, we have our information packet finished. We have other products finished that will help facilitate the good working relationship between the teams and the forest folks. But I did learn some good points today of things maybe to add concerning the delegation of authority, and maybe some things that we can add to our in-brief list of communication points. So, you know, that was good to hear some of that to be reiterated today.
Thanks so much, Robin. I always look forward to seeing the OakGwen packet come out. It was 2014, the first time that I saw that, and I was like, this is amazing. So yeah, I look forward to seeing what you come up with that kind of more expanded email list. So what else do we have? Any other questions in the chat or any other hands raised?
So I'm trying to renew my my FireNet 365, and since the line's still listed and they're working through that, Would you advise just using a guest profile for that versus trying to, push to get my profile, and others might be in the same boat?
That's a really good question. I think the last time I got the number from Boise, it was 700 deep or something like that for profiles. I know that they were prioritizing like plans chiefs, PIOs. So making sure that when you put in and if you can even say that, if you are associated with a team, I think that kind of helps float you up a little bit to the top of the list. The guest profile, so like how you were invited to this meeting, we can have you as a guest in the teams, that schoolhouse concept that we've been talking about. So you can be a guest and still see all the documentation that we've been talking about and the tools, but you have to be invited to the team. And yeah, we could do that. I think that's what you're asking. And I think that the only little glitch of that is then when you do get your FireNet, that's going to be a little bit of a toggling issue. But anyone else from that has a Forest Service profile and FireNet, feel free to jump in.
I was just glad there might be something to do in the interim if we get active. So thank you.
Yeah, there is. This is Chris again. There is some functionality, but there are some limitations to it as well. And again, I think that's why the emphasis on probably why the rush of people that are in the queue. But again, you can do some things and have some functionality, but there are some limitations, and we're still trying to figure out what some of those are. I would refer everybody to the FAQs on the FireNet 365 site. I think that link might be in the chat. But again, that's a great place to go to answer a question or find out maybe what's different, what's changed with the new Outlook and MS Teams.
Yeah, and then just to get back to you, Deborah, on the whether you should go for both, definitely just go for them all. I know we have public affairs officers who have their USDA, their guest, and their real FireNet account, and kind of toggle between. So probably just for your PACE modeling, push on both fronts, and your feedback on how these meeting invites and experiences get to you help us understand.
Hey, Kale, it's Chris again. I just want to add, that's a great point. Talking about people having multiple accounts. As an example, I'm using DOI BLM in Teams. That way, I've got my FireNet account and learning how I can maximize, right? Like, what is the best way, the best use of that? What do I do in DOI Teams? What do I do in FireNet Teams? And how can I take advantage of the different functionality between the two and to be able to do, to be able to work productively. So good point on it, using those two accounts and figuring out how they're different as well.
Yeah, going back to that, you play like you practice. I feel like even if you just want to kind of, set up a meeting once you get your FireNet account with one other person and kind of go, Don Ferguson could set up a meeting with Jim Whittington, and they could, just have that practice run on running a meeting. That's basically what we did in the beginning, probably like around March, of being able to start using this platform. And I wanted to do it when I wasn't in a yurt or sitting under a whole bunch of smoke. So let's see, do we have any more questions in chat, Kale?
We do. We have Virginia Gibbons with her hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask if the FireNet accounts were mostly geared towards the PIOs, or if you're recommending the PAOs get those as well.
Well, that's a really good question. I think if you are going to be active as a PIO, that is important to get the FireNet account because of like deploying or working virtually. being able to have access into the teams, to the FireNet teams. It looks like we can get you access as a guest, Virginia, without having a FireNet profile. But like Chris was saying, it might not give you that whole option. So say if like you wanted to have some virtual people and have a place where you could exchange documents, I think that that would be an incentive as a public affairs officer to get your FireNet. So then if you have people that aren't in the Forest Service that want to be able to exchange documents and have an open chat room, that would be the incentive in that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. And
Sarah,
yeah.
Two more points for you, Virginia, that came in from some other PAOs to consider when you transition to the local incidents. When you transition a type 2, type 3, type 1 that created a Teams account to local, you'll want your FireNet for that. And then if it's PL5 and you can't get a team, would be the other. And these suggestions came in from your peer group. Thanks, Sarah.
Virginia, this is Holly. I'm just recalling listening to your question, the 2017 Diamond Creek fire, and I think it burned into Canada, and it was over 120,000 acres up in the P.A.C.E wilderness in central Washington. And there'd been a NEMO team and there'd been a type 1 team, and we'd been at PL5 forever, and everything was tapped out. You couldn't big borrow or steal a caterer or a hand washing station or a dozer or anything. And so we cobbled together this like ad hoc forest type 3 team kind of to run the whole shebang. And so using our on-forest staff, we had to manage that incident until we could bring in another level of team when something else became available later. But there was a period of time there, I don't remember if it was a week or 2 weeks or something like that, where we couldn't get anybody. And so I could see that situation happening again this year. And so even being able to patch things together for a few days and have access to all the platforms and the emails and the conversation logs and everything else, I think is going to be super critical if we find ourselves, or when we find ourselves, in that potential situation again.
Thanks, everybody. It sounds like with the backlog, which is heavy, the guest profile is probably the best way to go right now.
Yeah, it would be, considering the backlog, and then you'll get escalated as fires creep into your area here. I just got a big celebratory text from Don Ferguson. Look at that. He found his way to the chat, which is great. So there are workarounds here, folks, depending on your accounts. That's part of what we're doing here, is figuring this out now. So it's not a critical planning or cooperator in brief. And I'm going to hand it back to Chris and Sarah to wrap her up and get ready for tomorrow. We're also going to have a special guest, Mar, who's the original VOST from PNW2 land, super professional, and she's going to give you a demystifying piece on VOST, which is in your wildfire response plan direction. So we'll get on that tomorrow too. Okay, passing it back.
All right. Thanks, Cale. Yeah, appreciate all the dialogue, good questions, good introduction, and a hook or segue into tomorrow's presentation. As we talked about, the syllabus or the agenda for all the classes is up there. There are resources in the resources folder for this class, and those will continue to get built out as we offer these just-in-time training. So I want to thank you for your time today. Look forward to seeing you for the next class, and I'm going to hand it over to Sarah if you want to make some closing remarks, and maybe Holly has some closing remarks as well.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Chris just said. Thanks to you guys. I mean, this is, I really commend everyone that has either, jumped through one hoop or maybe 3 hoops to get here. And like we've all said, we are all in this together, and I'm very thankful that we're able to have this training, before we are all ramped up in Washington and Oregon. And this is a great opportunity. And I know that we're all going to learn from each other. And it's just, as you can tell, I'm pretty excited about it. So thanks for being here. And Holly?
I just wanted to say thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate the time. I know we all have a lot of other things that we could be doing, but thank you for showing up, for participating, for assessing just where you're at as a fellow human being. I care deeply, and I know a lot of us, all of us, care deeply about the boots to the left and the boots to the right. And this is part of how we take care of each other and live out those values around service and duty and safety. So thank you so much, and can't wait for tomorrow.